Hi, John Cipher here. My friend Jon Matzner and I recorded 3 videos that correspond to 3 parts of my book, Output Thinking. The first part is what is output thinking and how should you use it? The second part shows that the outputs are best produced by systems and that's how your company scales. And the third part is a holistic look at all the systems in your company and how they interact, and shows how you can organize things to get what you want from your company. There's a fourth part which we didn't cover, 20 exercises to do in your CEO time, and they're scattered throughout the book. I want to thank Jon for recording these with me and recommend that you follow him on Twitter and subscribe to his great newsletter on Beehive called Lazy Leverage to learn even more ways to improve your work as a business owner. With that, let's get to the video.
So I am back with my friend Jon. We're talking about his book, Output Thinking, which is available for pre-order on Amazon, but when does it officially get released?
It releases December 7th.
Cool. So,
and people can go to outputthinking.com to look at the pre-order thing. And if you order it ahead of time and send me a receipt, I will send you a PDF so you can read it and hopefully put a review on December 7th. And also, you can only order the Kindle version pre-order. On December 7th, you can get the paperback as well.
cool. Okay. Good to know. And all, like, you'll put it in your thread or I'll put it in mine.
Yeah.
And so part one, we talked about outputs and output thinking. And, you and I's original kind of bond was over systems or systemization. And when I think about systems, I kind of, in order to build systems, you're forced to adopt output thinking. And I'd never actually discreetly pulled it out, kind of like how you did, which is look at output thinking and then the solution to systems. And to me, I was like, well, of course you have to do output thinking because you can't just be like, Bob knows everything and we're going to systematize that, right? You're forced to think like, what exactly does Bob know? And what does judgment actually look like, right? And so systemization assumes output thinking. You cannot break those. How do you think about the relationship? You probably, as always, I'm a bit glib. How do you think about the relationship between output thinking and systems?
So there's 2 ways that outputs are produced in a company. One is by people with lots of wisdom and experience and often intuition. I call it the grandma in the kitchen without a recipe. Yep. Thanksgiving dinner, which is coming up here, is wonderful, but you can't scale that. The other way that food, let's take Thanksgiving dinner, is produced is with a recipe. And now you can have division of labor. That's a system. And a system says, okay, what are we starting with? What triggers this? What's the input that we're working with? How do we transform that input into the ultimate output? And those are the 4 pieces of it. Now, the output is the reason you're doing the system in the first place. But if you're not doing it systematically, it's not going to be scalable.
So an analogy that I talk about endlessly that I love, that I deal with very often, right? And I think you know this about me. So, 2 years ago or whatever on Twitter, I started writing about systemization. Nobody cared. Right. Because I would write systemization and it'd be like, I could like hear their foreheads, like, smacking on the keyboard, right? Because systemization is really a means to an end, meaning it's a methodology. And when I think about systemization, why I've become obsessed with it is everything that you want out of your business. And I think you really, I want you to comment on like things business owners want out of their business, which I'd never really, you're like, oh yeah, it is just these 3 things, which is a really cool topic. But everything that you want, whether that's make more money, increase your profitability, not get effed over by that key employee, use global talent, automate more, do a tuck-in acquisition, increase enterprise value previous to a sale, whatever it is, right? For me, so much of that, the answer to that is like, I'm like banging the gong over and over, which is it's a system stupid. Like your book could have been like my book to complement yours would be called It's a System Stupid. Like, well, it's just like whacking that gong over and over. So the promise of a system, so if you say systemization, all these people just like, I'm a sales guy, I don't know, I do it. But when they come and they start with a problem, whether it's I work too much, I want to go on vacation, I want another location, but every time I've tried, you have to start, I think, with what people want, because if you just lead with systemization, they're going to be like, eh, I'm fine doing it without a recipe. And you're like, but you just said you're sick of making Thanksgiving dinner. And last year,
Right.
turkey got burned. And if you don't start with that and then say, all right, I'm going to introduce you to a thing called a recipe. Like, so will you talk a little bit about that dynamic?
So as you have hinted, the output is the reason. And the system is the way to produce that output repeatedly and scalably. And what I think you've done so brilliantly with your outsourcing stuff is you're couching it into, oh, you can get these really good people. They happen to be overseas and they happen to be cheaper, but they can't, because they're remote, you have to systemize what you want them to do.
Yeah.
And it's the systemization and the people who operate those systems that produces the output.
Yeah.
And so the parts to the system are the trigger, what starts it, what you're working on, the input, how you transform it to the output. But the two ways that a system scales is duplication and bifurcation, which is just bifurcation is division of labor. It's just a cool word that happens to rhyme with
That was
duplication.
the kind of word I'd use unnecessarily. That's my style.
Yeah, exactly. Duplication means we've got this system. We've got now more people doing the same system. So you have an invoicing system. Well, we have more invoices than somebody can do in 40 hours a week. We got two people. Now they're doing this we're duplicating that system. Sometimes when you do that, you need more capital expenses. You have a plumber and a helper and you have a crew and they're on a truck. Well, you need duplicate that. You got to get another truck. You got to outfit it and all that. The other way that it grows, and sometimes that's the best way to do it. You run a law firm, you have more cases, you hire more lawyers.
Maybe we could talk about that, because lawyers don't spend most of their time doing law stuff. We could.
Well, then that's because
maybe goes into the next one. Yeah,
that's because they haven't bifurcated. They haven't
All right, good.
subdivided their systems.
Yeah,
they don't have the paralegals doing what paralegals should do, so that the lawyers can do the stuff that only lawyers can do. And I came to this realization years and years ago. Some of my first coaching clients were lawyers, and I was looking at one of them and we were talking about it, and I realized the profit margin on their paralegals was higher than his time. So as many as paralegals as he could hire and keep busy, he would be doing more profitable work. And that's breaking down those systems so that they're subsystems, and the output of one is the input to the next. Like the thing I said before with my mail carrier, my addressing the envelope is his input.
So, I mean, I could,
where do you want to go from here?
I could go in 5,000 different directions here. I think the first one, especially for a lot of the folks that are going to watch this and listen to this just in the corner of the internet where you and I live, I think one of the big clicks for me was, you're talking about buying a business from a retiring baby boomer or operating one, and you're the young, hard charging, whatever. The missing asset of that business is systems. It's not on the balance sheet, but I would rather a systemized company than $100,000 on the balance sheet. Like, it is the missing asset of these businesses that haven't done an owner transition. So when you say, I'm going to do ETA and I'm going to buy this old school commercial plumbing company, so often, especially at the size that a lot of these people buy at, the thing that prevents this from becoming a lower middle market company, getting a 7 times, or like all these things, is they don't have a system on the balance sheet. They don't have a way of doing business that is predictable and scalable and uses lower skilled people. And that, so for me, do you agree? I think it's not a balance sheet item, but it's like a shadow balance sheet. It's like, do you have system?
It's an intellectual property, even though it's not protectable.
Yeah, it's,
in some ways. But here's the thing. When you buy that business, assuming you've done your due diligence and all the numbers are correct and there's no fraud going on
Yeah.
and you got, equality of earnings and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Um, the system, the outputs are being produced. I don't want to say the systems are working, but the outputs are being produced, or the company would not be in existence.
I love your point about AR and AP, by the way. Let's put that. That's such a great freaking example about.
Yeah, I mean, AP is happening. You're paying your bills, and
It might be happening inexpensively, sporadically, by
it
the
may be poorly done, but it's
Yeah.
happening. The output is happening.
Yeah.
Now, it may be too costly. It may
Yeah,
not be
correct.
scalable. All
Well,
this stuff. Yeah. So let's look at how do we get from here to there? Because if you buy this company and you just took on all this debt, usually, you don't want it to just do what it's been doing. You want
yeah,
it to grow.
yeah.
And you may want to sell it someday, and may want it to be worth more. And so you have to figure out how to produce those same outputs and more with a better system.
Can I also add one thing for me that I know you're going to talk about, which is
Yeah.
you know this because you've been in the game much longer than I have, but so much of what I do is out of fear. What's going to kill me next? And that's I'm fear based. I am, got a knife in my teeth and an eye patch and like a scabbard saying like, who's coming at me? And that's what only the paranoid survive, right? And a lot of what initially brought me into systemization was fear that if Steve, the senior technician, leaves, I'm fucked. I'm fucked. And so a lot of these ETA folks come in and theoretically they don't have constant. Oh, we've got 3 lead techs. But once you get in there, you're like, it's Steve. If Steve goes, I'm underwater. And so a lot of it for me was a lot of the calls for me was fear. Was I got to at least know what output Steve creates. I don't even know what he does all day. All I know is we're fucked if he leaves, or goes on vacation, or asks me for a raise. And so, like, that's also for me what brought me to it was fear, was pure unadulterated fear. Is that does that land with you at all?
See, for me, it was laziness.
Yeah.
I just got tired of doing the same things over and over again, and my brain is like, well, there's got to be a better way to do this. And, there's got to be somebody else that can do this. And,
Yeah. It's
um,
funny. I am extremely lazy as well, to be clear, right?
yeah.
Uh,
And I didn't take on very complex companies. I mean, I didn't have, rocket scientists and things
yeah.
like that I couldn't
But
replicate.
skilled tradesmen is a classic, a very classic one where a lot of these folks are buying the skilled trades and they've been at the company for 18 years and they're the only one who knows how to fix the widget machine. And then he's going to retire in a year.
Yeah. But so you end up with a company, and I've seen this, you have 5 or 6 people who are very experienced and all the wisdom's in their heads. And you get maybe 25 or 30 people who are in their 20s.
Yeah.
And they just do what they're told.
Correct.
And there's nobody in the middle.
Mm.
There's no training of people moving up. There's no middle management. And management has its own set of outputs. But that's the problem, is that it's functioning at that size and at that speed.
Mm.
But unless you get that information out of people's heads, then they can't move forward. Now, the tricky part of how to do that is to do it respectfully, because you can't just come in and say to somebody, look, you've been doing this for 25 years. We're just going to putting
you out to pasture.
Well, or even not that. We're just going to put everything you know into this computer program or have a robot do it. And they can't, because there's judgment involved. And that's the places that you can break systems out. And you can say to Steve, what do you do how do you know what to do at a job? Well, what do you look at first? And then he goes, well, I do this, I do that. Well, wouldn't it be great if you could spend all your time doing that critical piece and not all this other stuff?
Yeah.
And
Magic. I wrote a newsletter called What If You Only Did Magical Things?
yeah, exactly.
And
So
it's
my wife was one of the first women athletic trainer, University of Pittsburgh, back in the day. And there was a renowned surgeon there called Freddie Fu. And I think he was the first one to do this, but he had 2 operating rooms, and he had other people prep the patient, cut them open. He would come in and do his magic while somebody else in another operating room was getting another patient ready. And when he was done, somebody else would sew them up, put them back together, and he would go clean up, go into the next operating room.
Oh,
And that's what you want Steve to do. You want
or
Steve,
and replace that with lawyer, replace that with
right.
back technique. It's think yeah.
It's everybody plays at the top of their game. And that phrase comes from a guy, well, also in the medical world here in Pittsburgh, Tony DeGioia, who runs knee replacements and hip replacements at McGee Women's Hospital. And he developed a system called patient-centered.
Oh yeah, I saw that in the book about planning from the parking lot all the way through.
Yeah, and he looked at this whole thing and said, "What's it take?" And one of his content, his ideas is everybody plays at the top of their game, which in the medical world is easy, because he said a doctor, an MD, can only do what she is licensed to do. We won't let them do anything a PA can do or an RN can do. And the physician's assistant can only do things that they are licensed to do and won't do what an RN can do. An RN will only do that stuff. Because you have that legal licensure in the medical world, it's really easy to do that, and you restructure things. What he found was the patients were getting better medical treatment, they were happier, and it was more cost effective. Now, what you have to do in a business is say, okay, what are those top things that require this level of training and this level of skill? And what are the things that support that? And how can we get those lower things? And that's where bifurcating those systems comes into play, of breaking those pieces down where I'm doing this part, the output of this feeds into what you're doing, and you're doing the magic for that. And then you're feeding it to somebody else who's maybe closing it up or fixing it out, things like that. And
The analogy I use a lot is Gordon Ramsay doesn't do his own pots and pans.
exactly.
He doesn't dice his own. There's no magic in the way he dices bell peppers.
Well, if there is, he's trained somebody else to do it that
The
way.
point, and if there is, yeah. So, but he does the last spoonful before it goes out. He does the VIP relations. He sets the menu. Like those are the magic things. And so taking that same idea and methodology to a lawyer, lawyers are the freaking worst. They're, in my experience, they're spend 4 hours washing pots and pans. I'm going, you bill out at $500. Watched you try to create an email template that someone on Upwork could have done for $3. Right. As a silly example. Right.
I heard of a law firm where the 6 partners would spend an hour every day sorting the mail. This is yours. This is mine. This is whatever. And look, if you're the head of the company and that's what you want to do,
yeah, different. Yeah.
That's your choice. Just know how much it's costing you and how much it's keeping you from scaling up.
The image in my head always, I saw this one thing about how like John Cena, he signs like posters every day, and you could Google this on YouTube. And literally he's in a room and all he does is this. And he has a team of people who bring the book under his pen because he just does this.
Yeah.
And they take it and then they put it in and he signs like 1,000 in 60 minutes. Whereas if he had to open the page, flip to the and I was like, that is a perfect, he's the only one who can sign. But all this other stuff, even literally walking, he doesn't do. They bring the books and he just goes,
yeah.
And I'm like, that's an example.
Everybody plays at the top of their game.
Now, I think there's a really, really important thing that you mentioned earlier in the conversation that is one of how I've gotten into this category often is, and this is from E-Myth, a book you reference. There's some weird stuff in E-Myth, but there's a lot that I really like about it. Like run your business like you're going to franchise.
There's a lot of good stuff in it. I think it's just limited in how to do what he wants you to do. But go ahead.
But the concept that I think, and he kind of says it like bashfully, knowing that people aren't going to like what it says. But you said something earlier about paralegals, which is one of your jobs as the owner of the company is to produce the output with the lowest skilled labor possible. That is, and people like, they react to, and I'm like, no, If it's same quality output, but your job is to try to create a system that pushes it down the skill level, that is value creation. So if you can turn a system to take someone off the street to create X output versus, oh, they have a 15-year apprenticeship and I have to pay them $400,000 a year, you are in a completely different business. Can you speak to, because you mentioned with the paralegals, and I'm obsessed with this about trying
Yeah.
to output from the lowest skill possible.
And so what you want to do is find people who love doing that kind of work. And if you think about outputs more broadly, decisions are an output. And so certain kinds of decisions you can let these people do if they're trained how to do them.
Mm,
And they would love to do them.
mm,
They're not lawyers, but they're doing the work that paralegals do.
mm,
And for them, that's playing at the top of their game.
mm.
Now, it also provides a career path for people who want to get better and want to get more skilled. And you have to break down, okay, these are the 16 outputs that have to be done. When you know how to do these 8, we can give you a bump. We can give you a
Mm,
promotion. We can give you more but until you get there, and some people don't want to get there. I don't
yeah.
want to be responsible for that kind of
Yep.
decision. Great. Stay here, do this, and when you're talking about breaking down systems into subsystems, if you again, this goes back to entrepreneurs being very intuitive. If you stop, slowly go through each step of what you do, wherever there's judgment involved, that may be a place you can break that system into a subsystem
Mm.
and say, what's
Can you give
the
an example?
input?
Can you give an
So
example?
this was at SM Bash last year or the year before, and Justin Voigt was giving an example of outsourcing like 10,000 names of companies in a certain class. And he wanted to have a business relationship. I think he wanted to start relating to maybe buying some of these companies. But he knew that of those 10,000, there was maybe 500 that were the kind that he wanted. And he wanted somebody else to make the initial.
Now,
Um,
most searchers, this is where Justin and I have become friends, and we talk a lot about global talent and stuff like that because of
right.
this, where most people would stop right there. They would go, I'm the only one who can spot the 500 out of the 10,000.
Exactly.
That's where most people would go, I'm just going to work late. Sorry, honey, I'll be home late because I'm looking at these 10,000 trying to get. But what did Justin do?
Yeah. He goes through that list and he says, okay, what are the things that I use in my judgment to eliminate the ones that I don't want? And he found there were certain categories of, if it's a distributor, he doesn't want to talk to him. If it's a subsidiary, he doesn't want to talk to him. If it's in a certain geographic area, he doesn't want to talk to him. So now he can give instructions because he's used that judgment to somebody else to say, go through this list. And if it's in this category, if it looks like this, eliminate them. And if it doesn't, then you put them in this spreadsheet. And then the next step is, okay, what do we do with the ones that made the cut? Well, if it's got the owner's name, we write this kind of email to it.
Mm,
If it doesn't have the owner's name, we do this kind of research to try to find the owner's name. And if
mm,
we can't find it, we do this. And what you end up finding is that there's so many subsets and some systems in this where they feed into each other. Another example, and I think this came from A.O. Phillips, but I'm not sure. He was documenting taking an order. So an order comes in, how do you process that order and send it over to get fulfilled? And what he realized was, if the order comes in by email, it's slightly different process than if it comes in over the phone. And it's slightly different again if it comes in person. Well, the ultimate output of getting an order fulfilled is the same, but the steps are different.
mm.
And so you really have to get very granular with how these systems work so that you can train other people to do them and to do them properly and to do them repeatedly.
The one that I always run into, and it's just, we talked about it in our first session. The one that I consistently find myself running into is somebody, for example, runs uh, I've worked with a large veterinary clinic, and they say, "Oh, let's use something that's remote. Let's just say lawyer, because we've been talking about lawyers." And they come to me and they say, "John, I need A+ lawyers, but just overseas. The place where they manifest is they think the first place that they go is, I need more high skilled people, instead of saying, how do I create a system to create the output of making this person more efficient or replicating this? So almost always it's like, I just never have enough graphic designers, because you're asking them to do project management. You're asking them to do customer communication. They've never broken it out. And so where I've seen the symptom, like the sickness, comes as, I just can't get enough skilled people for the wages that I can pay. I find that that's like the manifesting symptom is, for what I pay, I just can't get graphic designers in Indiana. I can't get them. And so I can't grow. And they've never looked and realized their graphic designers spend about 10% of their time doing hard graphic design, and 90% of their time either doing basic graphic design or not even graphic design. And magically, by breaking apart these subsystems, they can get 5 or 10 times the output from their skilled person, because they're only doing graphic design. You know,
Yeah. Well,
have you seen that?
I'll give you another example using CPAs, and this will lead into the 3 kinds of systems. How do you document
Oh
them?
yeah. Yeah.
So you, let's say you're a complicated business situation, and you need a tax person. Well, part of it is understanding the tax strategy that we're going to use and designing that tax strategy. Same thing with legal, same thing with medical, lots of other diagnostic things. But the next step is, okay, now that we have that strategy, we're going to take your data and we're going to put it into these forms. Well, that part is not as a high level.
Up in vegetables.
That can be
doing dishes.
exactly. It's, Gordon Ramsay's created the recipe. Somebody else is cooking it. And so if you break it down that way, then you can say, oh yeah, these are the pieces that this person can do. And they're playing at the top of their game. This is the places that this person can do. And the other thing you find is that often creative people are not very detail oriented. And so they
Or
miss
salespeople.
yeah.
Or salespeople.
And,
Yeah.
and so people who are detail minded, not always creative. And so you want to match those skills or those character traits. Actually, they're not skills, but, and this feeds into the 3 kinds of systems when you start to document these systems so that you can train people on them. The first one is what I call a recipe, and it's very routine. It's step by step. And if you look at a cookbook, it tells you exactly how many grams of this to use and what order to put it in, what the temperature needs to be, etc. Those documentations are great for data, for computers and machines. And you should usually do it with a video and somebody talking through what they're doing. The next step is what I call a dance, which is where you're dealing with another person. You can't tell a salesperson, this is what you say, this is, then they'll say this, and you'll say this, and they'll say that. It won't work. First of all, they're not going to say what you thought they were going to say. But that's a dance. But what you can do with a dance is define the output. You can say at the end of your conversation, you want to know how motivated they are, if they're the decision maker, what their budget is,
Timeline to purchase.
whatever it is.
Yeah.
And so you can define the output, and then you say, okay, now you take that output and you put it in the CRM, and you then also want to have a follow-up date.
In a dance, you would also, though, because I've done this for like sales training as an example.
Yeah.
You also provide, I would call it, non-prescriptive instructions, meaning it wouldn't be like build rapport by saying, hello, John, I like your beard. You wouldn't say that. You would say, start the meeting by building rapport, look in the environment around you, and try to find a commonality. Like, is that a fair, like something?
Yeah, because
fuzzier,
again,
a little fuzzy.
You have described the output that you want, which is rapport.
Mm.
And that's a visible, you can tell when you have rapport and when you don't.
Yeah, for sure.
And so that's definitely
Interesting. Okay.
So that's the dance part. Then the third part is a creation, which is where the CPA comes in and says, okay, this is what we got. what's the strategy going to be here? And a creation, you don't always even know what the output's going to look like, but you do know the constraints. So in some cases, the constraints are the laws of physics. You can't send this thing in another direction. In some cases, it's the law. So a CPA would be constrained by the case law of and the tax law. A graphic artist would be constrained by what
File
fonts
size.
use, what colors are the company needs, what mood we want. And then I don't know what it's going to look like within those constraints. And so you can
What do you call
define
that third? What do you call that third one?
It's a creation. So there's a recipe, a dance, and a creation.
Would it, we were talking about this morning. I read a lot of stuff. I love reading. We all have our vices. I like to read old school Marine Corps leadership manuals and stuff like that. That's one of my vices. Would you say that in highly chaotic and ambiguous environments, if you look at how the Marine Corps often, for SOPs, what you would call a recipe, like how to clean the machine gun, super whatever. But in a chaotic, warlike environment, what the Marine Corps does is basically they do task, purpose, end state, and within that are constraints. But they're not prescriptive because they're like, I don't know where the enemy's going to be. I don't know. They're just like, look, here are the constraints. Here's the overall image. We're trying to invade Iraq. And the end state is depose Saddam Hussein. Like, is it chaotic environments lend themselves more to that third type of process? Or is it, what oftentimes is it
They aren't. They aren't always chaotic, but yes, definitely chaotic environments would be a creation state because it's chaos and you have to create order or some result out of that.
And you're operating and making decisions and managing within a constraint-based environment, not kind of like a prescriptive environment, like clean this gun or send this invoice. Right.
Yeah, but it's not always chaos. I mean, a legal situation or a CPA running a tax is not always chaotic. A doctor doing diagnosis, she's not always chaotic. But it brings up an interesting point. There's a quote from Dwight Eisenhower that is often misused. He says, plans are I'm going to mangle it here, but he says, plans are useless, but planning is everything. And if you read what he actually said, the context of it is, in an emergency, that's true. It doesn't mean that plans are useless all the time, everywhere. So if you don't have an emergency, if you don't have chaos, then the plans can be useful. If you have a chaotic or an emergency situation, the fact that you've done planning helps you a lot, even though your plans aren't going to be exactly right. And that comes into what the Rand Corporation developed called scenario planning. Where they say, we can't predict the future, but suppose interest rates go up. Great. We'll plan for that. Suppose they go down. We'll plan for that. Suppose they go, so we'll have 5 or 6 different scenarios. The future won't be like any of them. But because we've done the planning, we'll get to pick this one and that one and all that.
My friend Kevin, who was a very experienced naval special operator who you met, I think briefly, said, never be surprised by a predictable event. And that's meaning like, look, we know a credit card is not going to get charged and I'm not going to be on site with the customer. So I can prepare for that extremely predictable event. It hasn't happened yet. It's going to happen. So let's kind of get it out of our heads. I think we're running up on about 45 minutes for this session. Is there any final thoughts you wanted to put in the systemization module of our conversation?
No, I just want to tease up the next one, which is how do you look at all the multiple subsystems and systems that are in your company, and the way you do that is by looking at what I call the buckets that the outputs fall into, and those are the same for every company.
Cool. All right, we'll hit pause and we'll pick it up in part 3.